Hi everyone, welcome to THD, and today we are finally going to be able to talk about the Django ban. Or anything related to Django. And the question we're going to ask today is, what can we do about Django? So the reason why it took me so long to release this video, even though I've been knowing for Django being overpowered for a pretty long time, was that I wanted to have more evidence, because I wanted everything I say in this video to be sort of like backed up with actual data than just being my pure testing experience. So pretty much from the moment where War Juggernaut has been spoiled, my teammate Sip, that you probably know about because he's, in my opinion, one of the best Django player, at least in Europe, told me that Jango will be tier 0 because of that card, and I pretty much believed him. And after playing a game, many games against Django, even before the release of set 4, every game pushed me further and further from the confirmation and the realization that this awesome set 4 set had been completely blown out of the water by a couple of bad design decisions, which are understandable, as I shown in my video of how difficult is it to balance a gout game. But it is nevertheless disappointing to see that all the good work that has been done in many other areas of the set seem to have been kind of ruined by a balance issue related to this leader and how it interacts with the game. So we'll get into more details here, but before that, I just want to let you know that this video is sponsored by Card Market, the biggest marketplace for trading and selling Star Wars Unlimited card in Europe. So we're gonna start first by the very basic statement: is what is the problem? What's the problem with Django? We'll talk about the leader himself. Even though it is not so much a leader issue as it is an issue of an entire deck. This is one of the main differences between Boba and Jango. In Boba, it was very much a problem of just the leader being too good. In this case, it is basically just the deck being too good. Because I don't think Jango in a vacuum is that powerful. It's just the amount of support that he has surrounding him. And this is what we're going to touch on. But first of all, the leader, of course, he has very, very good stats for leader deploys on 5. Basically, 3-7 is as good as it gets in this new set. Since Boba has been banned, 3-7 for 5 is basically as good as it gets. He has the strongest leader ability once he's deployed. I still believe Han has the best leader ability, not deployed, but once deployed, Django has the strongest leader ability. And it's relatively recent because, once again, it's the synergy with the most recent card that has made this ability just completely out of control. And obviously it has insane synergies with other cards, which we're going to talk about. But yeah, so that's pretty much just a very basic. Something I understand is that Django was already one of the best deck of set 3. It was basically third best deck of the game, tied up with Quinlan in terms of like numbers of percentage of top 8, which is, I know, is not the ultimate metric, but it is a good metric nevertheless, and at least it is a consistent metric that we can compare from set to set. It was already one of the best deck in the game. And this new set has not given it 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but at least 5 or 6 extremely important pieces that together are making the deck, I wouldn't say invincible, but making the deck the strongest deck we've ever seen. And I'm going into a bit more detail. So first of all, there is the aggro matchup. Basically, Django right now is much better with set 4 at beating any aggro or mid-range deck. So basically any deck that is kind of relying on units to attack and trying to race. Racing a Django player is pretty much impossible nowadays. Even if you're playing a mid-range deck, you have first to clean up the board, and once the board is empty, hope that the Django player does not top deck anything, and then from that point on you can beat them. If you're trying to raise them, it's not gonna work. And the reason why it's no longer working is because Django is now capable of exhausting multiple units at once, not only one. In set 2, in set 3, sorry, if you wanted to basically exhaust multiple units at once with Django deployed, you had to utilize the combination of multiple cards. You have to go for the tank, exploit a couple of P38 or exploit some raider, and then this way you could basically deal multiple damage at once with units, and you could exhaust multiple units. But it was very, very expensive to do so because you had to exploit your own units, and you had to pull a very specific unit for this to work. This is no longer the case. Nowadays, all you gotta do is play one of those two cards, either IG-2000 or War Juggernauts, which not only are capable of dealing damage to multiple units at once without any condition whatsoever, they are also vehicles, which mean that they can be pulled out of Triple Dark Raid, which multiply even further the chances of you being able to exhaust multiple units at once. Needless to say, the Django, once deployed, is capable of exhausting an entire board multiple rounds in a row, and doing that extremely consistently, which make the matchup absolutely unplayable for aggro decks. And this way, you've seen aggro decks such as Sabine, used to be the second most played deck in the game, basically become almost non-existent in set 4 meta. Same for Han Yellow, to a lower extent. Han Yellow, one of the best deck of set 3 by far, became almost anecdotal in set 4 because of how counter it gets by just the ability to exhaust multiple units at once, but not only. So this is just an absolutely insane phenomenon that we are experiencing with some extremely powerful tools. Obviously, War Juggernaut is not only a way to exhaust multiple units, it's also an amazing pull out of Triple Dark Raid, comes into play ready with absolutely insane stats. And not only that, it's also cost 6, which is the same cost as Ruthless Raider. I mean that whenever you go Triple Dark Raid on with 4 resources, you are effectively doubling your chances to find an amazing pull. The second problem is that now it also beats Control, if you are talking about Control deck. So I know we recently saw a Bosk Control taking out the Liverpool sector qualifiers, which suggests the fact that hard control indeed can do well against Django, and that's true. But the thing is, obviously, not only does hard control has to make massive sacrifices and weaken all of its other matchup in order to get a chance to beat Django, Django can also react and has the tools to beat the deck if it wants to as well. Right now, I think that this Bosk did very well because most Django players ignore the control matchup, but I'm not so sure this would happen if Django players were just making adjustment in the list. So I'm mostly showing, of course. So Devastator is obviously one of the greatest additions for the deck to do well, even if you manage to stabilize the board, even if you manage to do very well. Devastators is an amazing comeback mechanic. It's a card that is excellent at closing out game. It's kind of like the 4 cards I believe in of Django, except that it comes with the 8/6 body, which is pretty insane. And obviously there's the option of putting it out Triple Dark Raid, which sometimes can deal 13 damage out of nowhere, which is absolutely disgusting, and then bounce the card back into your hand so you can play it again afterwards. Planetary Bombardment is not amazing against everything, but against out control it's insane. You get a 6, you can deal 8 damage to base directly when the board is empty, which happens quite often against hard control. And not only that, if you happens to have Ruthless Raiders or Devastators in play, then it's 2 damage to base, which is just very difficult to recover from for a hard control deck. So Planetary Bombardment is another amazing anti-control tool that the Django players have access to. Obviously there are other ones, but they are not new, so here I'm basically just showing you off only the card that were added to set 4, but you could even imagine, of course, adding some Bazine, adding some TIE Phantoms to even improve the matchup further. But yeah, the point being made is that Planetary Bombardment is those 2 cards that were indirect damage, generally speaking, just does very well out control, and you can definitely play a lot of indirect damage with Django if you decide to do that. So it basically has plenty of options to beat control. And obviously it beats another very large category of cards in the game, those are like the mid-range ramp, the control ramp deck and the mid-range ramp deck, and that's because of Sham Syndulla. Sham Syndulla is probably one of the best sideboard cards printed for set 4, and one of the best sideboard cards in the entire game. It has extremely aggressive stats, an immediate impact on the game, and obviously the ability to just to ramp into your leader is extremely impactful. Basically, if you're playing a ramp deck, so I was testing like quite a bit of Kira Green, and Kira Green does pretty well against Django until Sham Syndulla gets sided in. Once you get 3 copies of Sham Syndulla in the sideboard and you start playing as hard control, and you start playing against Kira versus Jango, the Sham Syndulla just come on. Obviously you need to ramp in soft like ramp control decks really need to ramp on turn 2. That's almost like always a rule. If you don't, the deck is just significantly weaker. And the fact that Sham Syndulla can give you that ramp from Django, basically it cancels out the ramp of the opponent, sort of, by giving you like a, you no longer have you basically wasted the entire turn and you don't even have a resource advantage. And the fact that it allows you to ramp into Django and then deploy Django right away is absolutely insane. As well as giving you a very strong body. The 5/4 is really nothing to be scoffing at. So this card is single-handedly basically completely fixing the ramp matchup for Django. Another big reason I think that Piet is not performing so well is also because Sham Syndulla is in almost every single sideboard. Is such a massive counter to it. It's also a great card against Han, which happens to be the best deck of previous set. So it's just compensate all the weaknesses of the deck. So basically the deck has basically obtained everything you could possibly dream of, and more. It's really incredible how much support the deck had in just a single set, especially for a deck that was already considered to be one of the best decks in the game. So obviously, without any surprise, this had some seriously negative consequence on the meta. So let's talk a little bit about numbers. Between the 3 major tournaments of set 4, so obviously the set has only been out for about a month, so we don't have that many tournaments to speak of. But the few tournaments that we have are some of the largest and most competitive events we've ever had in Star Wars Limited, and they are also and the dominance of Jango in those tournaments is so incredibly clear that even though we have a very small sample size, it is very safe to say that Jango is the most dominant deck that we've ever seen in Star Wars Limited. Across the 3 top 8 of those 3 tournaments, we got a 62.5% of those top 8s were Jango decks. That is absolutely absurd. Like, just to give you an idea, so basically, when Boba was at its height of its power, which was during the season 2, during the set 2 PQ season, it was representing about 40% of the top 8 were Boba decks. This is 20% more than that. If you think that the dominance of Han in set 3 was high, it was 30% of the top 8. This is twice as much. So obviously this is a small sample size, only 3 tournaments, while PQ we're talking about many more tournaments, but those tournaments are so incredibly large. I think they are more reliable than PQs because the selection is far more, there's far more layers of selections that filters out every possible kind of luck wins, or like on a, you can be lucky and get a top 8 into a PQ. No, you can't do this in a tournament like a sector qualifiers. You need to have a very solid deck and be a very good player. Like obviously luck will help you get there or get close to it, but obviously the more players there's into, the more rounds you have to get through, the less luck becomes a factor, which means that the result of those tournaments is far more reliable than the PQ. Obviously PQ make up for that with the quantity, but and we'll talk about this later on, but still 62.5% of top 8 is incredible. So obviously this percentage on its own doesn't tell the whole story, because if you have 62% of the meta being represented by this deck, then having it ended up at 62% of the top 8 is not an improvement. It's basically the proportionate, right? So maybe the deck is just overplayed, but it's not overplayed. It's actually not overplayed at all. Basically, we got 26% of Django in Milan, 18% of Django in Liverpool, and 19% of Django in Denver. So they have basically from starting of the tournament to the top 8, they have a 300% increase in conversion rate compared to their initial. Though they basically go from roughly 20% to 60%. That's 3 times the percentage. That means, and this percentage increase very, very steadily whatever the stats you look at. So if you look at my previous video, you see the numbers of Django in proportion is increasing day 2 top 8, day 2 top 8 for each of the tournaments. So you could even it's and the fact that it's progressing is the sign that the deck is just much stronger than all the other decks. The conversion rate is simply just absolutely insane. So that's something that is very important to understand. Another factor is that even though Boba has never managed to reach such results, despite being played in a variety of archetypes, you would imagine that even if you take into account all the different kind of Boba decks and you gather them together, you still wouldn't get to those results that we're doing with Django Red. And that's obviously, we're talking about Boba Green being very different from Boba Blue, is very different from Boba Red, very different from Boba Yellow. And you could argue that even though they are all the same leaders that share some cards in common, they all have a very different playstyles and they're all completely different decks. While here we are only talking about one deck, Django Red. Of course, there are different versions of the deck, a few different cards change, but this is the same archetype, has the same core of cards. So the fact that a single deck is capable of taking that much space in the top 8s is absolutely unheard of in the history of Star Wars Unlimited so far. So moving on with the other kind of data points is the observation, and that's not my opinion, I think that's fact. Django is the most powerful deck we've ever seen in Star Wars Unlimited. Market share in terms of market share, in terms of progression, in terms of how the deck feels, how difficult it is to counter, and how wrapping it's and how fast it managed to convince everybody. Like, basically there has been no, like, it took us time to find the Boba. I don't know if you remember in set 2, basically before Django Red, I think the most powerful deck we've ever seen in Star Wars Unlimited was Boba Green. And even though Boba Green was very popular in set 1, it was not like dominant. It was one of the best deck, but it was not like super dominant. In set 2, it took us a while to find a build. Like, we had to wait until Manchester, where Josera actually won the Boba with Boba Green, to actually find a build that would actually eventually dominate the entire PQ season. And while here the Django Red deck was found almost right away, and it was only a matter of time for the next tournament comes out that the deck was going to be completely dominating. So the speed in which it took us the meta is also another factor to take into account. So yes, it's only been a month since this deck has been a problem, but it's been a very, very prolific month for the deck, and as much as it could possibly be, I would say. The only element that limits the Django's performances, because obviously there's been tournaments where Django has only been there's a tournament, so there's a top 8 in the BTL event, where in the Bottom Network event, where there were only one Django in top 8, I believe, or 2. I think only 2 Djangos. Another one, and obviously the top 8 of Liverpool only had 3 Djangos in it. But obviously, looking at the top 8, you have to look at the broader tournament. And if you look at the broader tournaments, this is the Django is still very much dominant. And not only that, you have to take into account that we are now in a meta where everybody is taking against Django. Everybody is building his deck, knowing the Django is going to be a thing. And despite that, despite all this adversity, Django is still dominating. This is something very important. Once again, when Boba was dominating, when people started to go counter Boba, the dynamic was Boba Green was very strong. People started taking his Boba Green. People would switch from Boba Green to Boba Yellow, or they would switch from Boba Yellow to Boba Red, or they would switch to Boba Yellow to Boba Blue. And if Boba Yellow becomes too dominant, people switch to Boba Green, and that was kind of the dynamic. So every week you would see a new Boba coming out, sort of. While here we are talking about one single deck. That means that everybody is in full force trying to counter this deck, which only has one build that is not that different from one another, and they still don't manage to prevent it from trusting the vast majority of the top 8 spot. That's absolutely unheard of on Star Wars Limited. We've never seen such a deck being able to resist such adversity in terms of how much people are trying to take against it. We've never seen that before. And another thing that is also quite scary is the fact that Django players have not yet figured out the best version of the deck. There still is some room for improvement. Obviously, the deck has only been out for about a month, and there's tons of powerful options. And I don't think the Django players have yet figured out what is the perfect Django build. There's still some very big differences between the European version and the American version. So this is something that is even scarier to think about, is how much better can this deck can be, and I think it can become quite a bit better than what it is now. And it's also a deck that is quite difficult to play. We've seen that most people who are performing in tournaments are players who were Django main in set 3, like for example Sip and Beton from Team Enigma. Those players played a lot of Django Red in set 3, and that's why they are so good with it in set 4, and so is the case for the other Django Red who are doing well. Once again, it might be exception, but for the most majority. So imagine how much worse that this situation can be if you give all the players more time to master the deck, and how much more insane can this deck can become if there's more players capable of piloting it at a high level. This is also another very scary thing to think about. That could even mean that Django was actually only starting to get strong, and it could actually become even stronger than that. So, now we are, of course, asking the key question: should we do something about it? So, for this, I like to answer this, the same question is, what percentage of the meta does it occupy? For how long has it been the case? Is it fun to play against? Is it oppressive, meaning does it prevent other strategy from existing? And does it create other problems, such as the game taking too long to resolve, that kind of thing? So, what percentage of meta does it occupy? Well, right now, it's occupying 60% of, more than 60% of top 8 spots in all the major tournaments we've seen so far. This might go up, this might go down, but in my opinion, it doesn't matter. Anything above 20% is too much. So here we are 3 times that percentage. So I think everybody would agree that even if, let's say, during the PQ season, this percentage goes down by even 20%, which I don't think would happen, by the way, this would still be way, way too high. For how long has it been the case? Well, this is definitely the area where this is one of the main arguments against the Boba ban, is like he's only been dominant for a month, which is not a long time by any metric. So obviously, players did not have a lot of time to try to counter it. So that's one argument in favor, that would be in favor of not banning him or not doing anything about it. Is it fun to play against? No. Why is it not fun to play against? Just because it's not fun to not be able to play with your units. So against, you could argue, well, Control is also a deck that prevents you from playing, but that's the thing, Control only does that. So then the game becomes like a kind of a different game, where you're kind of like trying to stick a threat on the board. So it's a different dynamic. But what is very feels very awful about Django is that it will prevent you from playing the game and then kill you at the same time. Normally it's one or the other. It's you got you're playing against a Sabine player. He will, okay, of course he can interact in some degree, but he's an aggro deck, so he will attack you and it's pretty much going to be a race, so it's going to be your ability for you to protect yourself. If you're playing against Jango and you're playing a deck that is based on units to actually play the game, and you got your units being tapped over and over and over again, it's so incredibly frustrating. And it is the main point of interactions in the game, is to be able to use unit to kill the enemy units. And if you're not capable of doing this, you are not capable of interacting with your opponents. It is just very frustrating to have your entire board being exhausted over and over again. And I think that was kind of acceptable in the previous set of the game, because it was difficult for Django to exhaust an entire board all at once. But now it is so incredibly easy that it's just ridiculous. And I think that you had this argument where so I honestly didn't find Jango very fun to play against in set 1 already, but in set 3 it's just in set 3 already, but in set 4 it became completely ridiculous. Is it oppressive? Yes, it's absolutely is oppressive, especially towards the aggro decks. It's pretty much impossible to play aggro anymore in this meta. Sabine, that was to be one of the best deck in the game, is now basically unplayable, or nearly unplayable. The only aggro deck that is playable in this environment is Gar Saxon, because it has specific tools to deal with Django, so it's obviously incredibly oppressive. But it's not only oppressive towards aggro deck, it's oppressive towards a whole huge amount of decks. It's really, really oppressive. And does it create other problems? No, it doesn't create any other problem than those three, but those are the most important ones, so obviously we're not going to spend too much time on this. Moving on. So I'm just gonna play the devil advocate here and try to give a couple of arguments in favor against banning him. So the first argument that you're gonna hear people defending going against the ban of Django is there are answers to it. There are answers to Django. And my answer to this is that, okay, there are answers, but those answers are, in my opinion, way too narrow and are not strong enough against the rest of the field. So it still results into a tier 0 meta. Something you gotta understand is like, this, no matter how strong a deck is, you're never gonna have like 60-50% of the meta made of that deck. Unless you are maybe in like some super high stake tournaments or whatever, and the meta is particularly bad. But most likely people just like to play the deck that they like to play. And they also, even more so, because playing a deck that you're comfortable with is also makes you play better. And there's a strong argument to be made that you are performing better with the deck you're comfortable with, even though if it is a little bit worse than other options, rather than playing the best deck and not knowing how to play it. And also there's all this phenomenon of like, you want to try to chase the showcase. Some people are just trying to win to get the showcase that you get in those tournaments and that kind of thing. And there's just people who simply don't care and they just want to play the game to have fun, and that's represent actually probably the majority of people. So it doesn't matter how overpowered the deck is, it's never going to see completely play. That means that whenever you are trying to counter that deck, you need to counter that deck, yes, but you also do need to be able to win against all those other decks that are going to show up. So having a deck that is specifically made to counter that deck is only is not necessarily going to work for you. So for example, of course, you go to let's say you build a deck like, for example, this cat blue deck that did pretty well against Jango during the Botham tournament. You have the problem is, like, if your deck does very well against Django, Django is only representing 19% of the meta in Denver. So then you bring this deck to Denver, and then you don't. There's a very, on average, you're supposed to be meeting. Alright, let's say you make it to day 2 around the 13 games you're playing. You're gonna be on average playing against 2 Djangos. So if you're not good against the rest of the field, you're not even making it to day 2 actually. So it's not a good strategy. So in order to have a real counter, you need to find a deck that is able to win against Django consistently, which would be about a 60% win rate, and at the same time being able to do okay against the rest of the field. And this deck does not exist. There's not a single deck in the game that is capable of beating Django consistently and at the same time doing well against the rest of the field. So you could argue the new boss card control. I would also argue that the boss card control kind of took the meta by surprise, and this is what the hard control decks do. And I don't worry that if boss card control start to become even a half answer to Django, people are going to start taking against it, and the hard control players are going to have a lot less time. I know something about it because this is exactly the strategy I used to win a tournament. So this is something that if you want to beat those hard control is a great deck if the field does not expect it. And is not prepared for it, because it's a deck that basically approaches the game in such a different way that it really requires very specific answers. The second big argument in favor of not doing anything about Django is that it has only dominated the meta for about a month, which is way too early for a ban. If you pay attention to the only other thing that has been banned so far, which is Boba, in order to earn the ban, Boba had to be dominant for an entire PQ season, which was about 2 or 3 months. So that's about 2 or 3 times the times that we spent on Django, and it also was already a dominant deck before that. Django is not, we're not there yet. We've only been about a month. So obviously, whenever you're a game designer, you are trying as much as possible to let the player find the answers by themselves. Instead of trying to jump on the bandwagon right away. In this case, I would say that even though, yes, it has only been a month, what happened within a month is that we've seen the biggest tournament of Star Wars Limited that have ever happened. And I honestly think that already in Milan, players were very aware of the Django threat and tried everything they could to counter it. I also think they tried everything they could in Denver and Liverpool. I think that Bosk worked for that tournament, but I don't think it will work for the future for the reason I already explained. And I strongly doubt that the meta will be able to significantly improve. And even if you think there's a chance that we might find something that would improve it, the risk that you are taking of ruining the entire season is way too high to be worth risking. There's also some sort of risk management for the designers. Is like, what are the odds of the players finding an answer? If the odds are like something like 60-70%, you're like, okay, well, maybe you take the risk. If the odds are maybe 10%, you don't take the risk, because a 90% chance of the entire season being ruined is a very, very risk that I don't think is a good risk to take, in my opinion. So now that we all agree that yes, something needs to be done against Django, what can we do? What is the specific action that needs to be done in order to answer the Django issues? And for this, there's a number of things that we can do that I've listed here. So the first one is Errata Django, so it can only tap 1 unit once deployed. So right now, there's no limit on numbers of units Django can deploy. We can make this a once per turn thing, just like for Cat Bane. You play you deal damage to a unit, you exhaust that unit. So basically Django, once he's deployed, would be pretty much the same as when he's not deployed. The other option is to ban Leader, to ban Django. Another option is to ban probably the biggest contributor to Django being overpowered in this meta, which is War Juggernaut. Basically, War Juggernaut is there are obviously, as I said earlier, there's plenty of set 4 cards that are making Django so strong, but among those different cards that he got, War Juggernaut is probably the biggest one. Then there's ban Triple Dark Raid, which is the best card in the deck. And then there's banning Tarkintown, which is the base that Django is using, which he has every single game. So the first argument is to Errata Django. So the positive are basically in the green, and the negative is in orange. So the first positive, it would make the deck less good versus aggro, because if you're not able to tap multiple units, then suddenly the deck Django becomes a lot easier to deal with for an aggro deck. So that's the positive. The negative is like I don't think the multi-tab is only really truly relevant in the aggro matchup and in certain mid-range deck. It's not necessarily helping in some other areas. So I'm not sure if that would be enough to really answer the problem. The other count to an errata would be that having a card not play as it is written is very annoying and disruptive. So, and this is something that FFG has decided to shy away from, and that's why they didn't try to errata Boba. They just decided to ban it outright. So it's something that they have not shown that they were willing to do for Star Wars Unlimited. The other option is to ban the leader. Well, the benefit of this is that obviously that would be a pretty radical solution of the Django issue. In terms of it would definitely just solve the problem outright, very straightforwardly. In my opinion, banning a leader outright should be the last recourse. It should be like, because there's just simply no other option, or because it's just, for example, in the Boba, it was really not a deck problem, it was really a leader problem. It was really, as long as his leader was going to be legal, no matter what else you ban in the deck, it was always going to be a problem that he was always overstat, and he was always going to be better than anything else you could play in Cunning Villainy. So that was really so there were no other answer than just to ban the leader. There was just no other way to do it. For the case of Django, it's really a deck issue. So in my opinion, I don't necessarily think that banning the leader himself is necessarily the only thing you can do. And you gotta understand that Django leaders are the most important card of every deck. People grow attached to certain leaders, to certain playstyles, and I think that banning a leader should be a last recourse in terms of what you want to do for a leader. Not only that, there are also a lot of people who have collected the Showcase, which is a very expensive version of that card, and obviously banning that card would radically reduce the value of that Showcase, which I don't think is a good thing to do. While if you're banning, let's say, regular cards, then people are not going to be salty because you can't play the hyperspace version of that card or the hyperspace 4 version of that card, because they're not as valuable as the Showcase itself. And also, most people collect Showcase, as not many people actually collect hyperspace 4 for the purpose of gameplay. In any case, what I'm trying to say here is that I would always try to avoid banning leader if it's possible, and I think in this case it is possible. I don't honestly think that is the only option to just ban the leader outright. I think there are other things you can do. Now we go into ban War Juggernaut, and banning War Juggernaut would definitely make the deck a lot less consistent versus aggro, but we'll still be able to multi-tap with IG 2000. And the War Juggernaut could be replaced by other card, by the tank that the Jango players were playing in set 2, which is not nearly as good as Juggernaut, but still pretty good. And I think it's the same issue as the errata thing, is like, yes, it does make the deck worse against aggro, but ultimately in other matchups, War Juggernaut is not really good. Like, War Juggernaut is really specifically good against aggro. So I'm not sure that would be enough. People would also replace War Juggernaut by Fire Spray, which would make the deck better against control, which, by the way, I didn't mention it, but Fire Spray is another card that Django players could play to improve their control matchup. And I think it'll still be, I think because IG 2000 still exists, it would just make the deck less consistent, which I don't think is necessarily like a good thing, because then it creates those kind of game where, did you find IG 2000? Yes or no, and if you do, you win. If you don't, you don't. So it's not that great of gameplay, in my opinion. And then you end up in those situations where so the deck will still be very, very good against aggro, and and it would just so I don't think it would be enough. And you're not really addressing any long-term issue, because next time FFG prints another multi-tap thing, we are back into the same problem. So you're not really answering any long-term issue with this ban, in my opinion. So I would be against a ban like this. Then there's the triple dark raid. So triple dark raid ban has multiple advantages. First of all, it's by far the most unfair aspect of the deck. I think that card like Ruthless Raiders, War Juggernaut, even combined with Jango, those cards are not so busted whenever they don't come into play ready. Especially War Juggernaut. the consistency that it gives you, the ability to find those specific cards, obviously the combination with Devastator, which is absolutely disgusting. This card is absolutely gross. I still think that even without Triple Dark Raid, Django would still exist. It would still be a deck that I think could be playable. And it would obviously be a trillion times worse, but it would still be a possibly competitive deck. And I think that by nerfing the most unfair aspect of it, you're also making the deck a lot worse. I also think that TDR is likely to be a very big problem in the future. I think that as time goes by, every time FFG is going to be wanting to try to print a vehicle, it's going to have to think, wait a second, is that vehicle not too overpowered with Triple Dark Raid? So basically, for example, cards like Devastators are, I think Devastator is a completely fine card on its own. It's just a combination with Triple Dark Raid that makes it disgusting. I think Triple Dark Raid is making vehicles very difficult to design for the future, and I don't think that's good for the game. So, since Triple Dark Raid is likely to be a big issue in the future, might as well ban it now, so then you don't have to worry about it anymore. Another big argument for Triple Dark Raid is that it is one of the cornerstone of every cunning villainy deck. I think the only cunning villainy deck that doesn't run Triple Dark Raid in the current meta is Gar Saxon, and even some version of Gar Saxon will still run Triple Dark Raid. So one of the big arguments that a lot of people, very rightfully so, have raised is the fact that cunning in general is too strong. And I think Triple Dark Raid, at least on the villainy side, is the biggest offender, because not only is he making a lot, it pushes a lot of deck in the yellow direction, just because of how powerful it is. Basically, the only reason why people play Piet yellow is because that gives them access to Triple Dark Raid, because there's not really a lot of good capital ship in yellow. It's just ridiculous. So it just pushes so many decks toward the yellow, which is not good for color diversity. And not only that, the answers, the counters to Triple Dark Raids are also yellow. So talk about No Good to Be Dead, any exhaust effect, Wele, all those cards like Commandeer, all those cards that counters Triple Dark Raid are yellow as well, which means that now it's either you play Triple Dark Raid or you counter Triple Dark Raid, and either way you're gonna be playing yellow. So I think that banning Triple Dark Raid will go a long way in making yellow a far worse color, and would rebalance the color a little bit. I don't necessarily think that would be enough, but that would be a really big step toward the right direction. So the only argument against Triple Dark Raid really is the fact that while Django is a problem, other Triple Dark Raid decks are not a problem. Piet Yellow is a perfectly fine deck, and so is other Triple Dark Raid deck that currently exist. Like, for example, we even talk about Tarkin and stuff. So I don't necessarily think that, so obviously whenever you're trying to ban a specific deck, you try to nerf that deck without having a negative impact on other decks. So it does affect other decks that are not OP to ban it. So that's basically the pro and cons. Moving on to the ban Tarkintown. So the argument in favor of banning Tarkintown is that Tarkintown has been overly represented in the meta and is definitely oppressive. So Tarkintown is by far the most played deck in the current meta, and that was also true in the previous set 3. It makes certain decks really, really strong. I think Quinlan is very, very, is really, really, really strong because of that. It's also quite oppressive. There's certain deck that does not exist because Tarkintown is now everywhere. Remember Hantu? Hantu was one of the best leader of set 2. It was actually considered by many to be the best leader of set 2, and it is an amazing leader. It's just that as long as Tarkintown exists, it's going to be very, very difficult to justify playing him. So it's also quite oppressive. My argument against banning a Tarkintown is that you are basically not fixing the Django dominance, because Django is completely fine playing 30 HP base. As we saw during the Denver tournament, actually 2 Django 30 HP base actually were in top 8, and one of them being the winner. So even though I personally think that you should be playing Tarkintown in Django, Django 30 HP base is definitely better It's definitely it would just be like a small nerf to the deck, not really a significant one. So it wouldn't really perform its job. And if you really want to ban Tarkintown, you will need to ban this. You need to ban something else alongside it to address Django specifically. Follow-up questions is: does it means that it's okay to unban Boba 1? And so this is something a lot of people have been said, is like, you should unban Boba 1, so then there's an answer to Django. And I think so the answer to that question is no, please. So very straightforward, no, it's not a good idea to unban Boba for multiple reasons. The first reason is that if your point is really to say, well, we need to unban Boba so it can counter Django, well, suddenly you are in that dynamic of, well, there's only two types of decks that exist, are going to be the Boba decks and the Django decks. And that's not good, and especially when you know that those leaders are basically sharing the same color. So basically the diversity of the is going to be just absolutely awful as a result. The second thing as well is that I'm not necessarily sure. I'm fully convinced that even if Boba would be illegal, I still believe Jango would be a better deck. So basically the only thing with Boba that does really counter Jango is Boba Fett's armor. So Boba Fett's armor would basically, is very, very strong as Jango, because it means that your unit becomes untappable and you can put this on your leader, which is great. But it's only one card, and it's a card that is an upgrade that can be removed at disqualifying fighters. So while I think Boba would be very strong in today's meta, it would not be a real counter to Jango, I think. So it's crazy to say that, but I think Jango Red is a as I said earlier, is a more dominant and more powerful deck. Even though as a leader Jango is worse than Boba, like in a vacuum, the synergies with the leaders are so much stronger. Boba doesn't have that many crazy synergies with the other card. It has good synergies, and it's just a great leader, and that's the reason why Boba can be played with any sort of colors, is because you don't really care about the synergy, you just care about the leader being so good, and then you can just pair it with whatever strategy you want to do. While Jango is really specific for a very specific thing, but what that specific thing beats anything Boba could do, in my opinion. So before we go into my personal opinion on what should be done for the ban, I just wanted to tell you that you can currently buy Ahsoka Tano for 4.5 euro, the most expensive rare of the set, in my opinion one of the best card in the set, and also in my opinion a card that, if Jango gets banned, is going to become even more valuable. So maybe it's a good time to pick up some Ahsoka. So now we're going to my personal opinion of what do I think should be done for the set. And basically my opinion is the following. First, we should ban triple dark rate. As I said, yes, you are affecting decks that you are doing a little bit of collateral damage with this ban, affecting decks that are not necessarily OP, but I think as you can see on the previous slide that I've talked about triple dark rate, I think the good far outweighs the bad, and it's just better for the future of the game, and it is by far the most unfun aspect of the game. Another thing that I didn't talk about is like what I don't like about triple dark rate is the random aspect to it. The fact that sometimes it pulls the absolute nuts and sometimes it pulls nothing is very frustrating to play with and against, and that's the reason why the Django mirror sometimes can be so stupid, is because it really comes down a lot into what you can pull from triple dark rate, and I don't think that's a positive thing for a competitive game. The other thing that I would do is like I would add a rule that makes that you cannot destroy a resource that you control but do not own. So this is a very specific line of text to add in the base rule. The reason why I would want to add this in the rules and not as an errata on hand 1 yellow is because this way you do not actually need to do an errata. You can actually put this in the base rules. So this was an idea actually from Beton, if you wondered, and of course the idea is to prevent the DJ hand combo where you get to steal a resource from your opponent and then you get to destroy that resource, so then your opponent can never get it back even if it kills the DJ. So this combo is basically So I've talked a lot about this combo, and I'm not gonna get into too much details. But basically, the crux of the story is that I don't necessarily think that this mechanic is overpowered. I just think that it's very frustrating for a lot of people, and not very fun. And on a separate note, I also think that I'm just a little bit afraid that if you simply just ban triple dark raid, you'll be back into a Django a set 3 meta where Han is like the best deck, which I don't necessarily think would be a horrible thing, but I just think people don't like to just come back to a previous meta. They would just rather see something new and fresh, and just for that purpose alone, making that change and making Han significantly worse as a result of this would be beneficial. And I think it's a proportionate. I've seen some people suggesting a Han ban, which I think in my opinion is crazy, because even though Han was the best deck in set 3, it was not nearly on the same level of dominance than anything that is ban worthy in my opinion, on top of course being a very beloved leader. It is personally my favorite leader, but also favorite leaders of many people, in both in terms of gameplay and in terms of thematic. So I think it would be just very disproportionate to do that. I think first start with nerfing the DJ Han combo would be far enough as a starter, and then see how things evolve. A third thing I would do, even though it's not really doing anything, is just put the Tarkintown on sort of a watch list, which means that ban it shortly after if Tarkintown deck remains too dominant. There's a very strong argument to ban Tarkintown on top of those 2 elements above that I already put out, because it makes it so Tarkintown is quite oppressive and it sees a bit too much play. With that being said, banning triple dark raid would go, and therefore reducing the power of making Django not even close to be as strong as he used to be, would definitely go a long way in making Tarkintown less played. So maybe that would be enough, or maybe that wouldn't. Obviously there's still the Quinlan thing. Quinlan is still one of the best decks, so but it's at this point it's just a little bit too difficult to know if it's a good idea or not, because you don't know how the meta is going to evolve. So this is why I like to do like very surgical bans, like ban something really surgical instead of doing like a bunch of bans, because it's not necessarily going to be the case that Tarkintown is going to be a problem in a meta that doesn't have triple dark raid, because then suddenly Django is not even close to be as good as he used to be. So that's a huge deal. Another thing as well is that Quinlan is, yes, a very powerful deck, but it's a deck that has never been on the radar. It's a deck that has never been the deck to beat. It was always kind of like this very good deck you could play and do well in tournament, that can kind of do well against everything, but it was never the center of attention. The center of attention in set 3 was Sabine and Han in particular. It was not Quinlan. So if Quinlan becomes the deck to beat, I don't know if the deck would be doing as well anymore, because there's a very big difference between a strong deck that is kind of in ambush mode and a deck that is kind of the center of attention of almost everybody else. So that's something you have to keep in mind as well whenever you consider balance. So this is basically the thing I would do: ban triple dark raid and change the base rule of the game so the DJ combo does not work anymore. That's kind of the 2 things that I would do. And I would strongly think about Tarkintown, and I would be ready to ban it as soon as I find out that there's still too much Tarkintown. But as I said, I don't want to do it outright because I don't know how the meta is going to evolve. So those would be my recommendations to FFG. Next question is, when should this ban happen? Because it is important for the tournament calendar. People need to have enough preparation. And basically the next qualifier, the next sector qualifiers, is coming up in Richmond on the 26th of April, which is actually in about 20 days from today. So in my opinion, you need to be able to give enough time for people to adapt to the new meta. You do not want to make a ban announcement 2 days before a big tournament happens, obviously. In my opinion, if you're giving 2 weeks, I think that's enough, but obviously the earlier you do it, the better. So this is something to be taken into account. It turns out that coincidentally, there's going to be an announcement on the 9th of April, a stream from FFG, where FFG is going to be going through the state of the meta, and they're going to discuss if they're going to do anything about it. And obviously this would be a perfect opportunity for them to announce a ban. And actually almost everybody who is aware of that calendar is very much expecting them to do so. The community expectation on this are quite high. People at this point are not even wondering if they're going to do a ban or not. They are just wondering what ban they're going to do on this date. So this would obviously be a perfect date to get this ban announcement going, because it gives them a couple of days, of course, to do some analysis on what happened this weekend, and it also gives a lot of time for the people who are preparing Richmond to prepare their deck. Another cool thing as well is, and this is the reason why I'm coming out with this video today, because I want to make sure that I can give my opinion before the ban actually happens. And maybe the dev would actually watch that video, and maybe that will influence their opinion on what they will do. I don't know. I don't expect to have that sort of influence, but who knows. Yeah, so that's basically it for this video. That's basically my entire opinion about this whole thing. I could talk about hours and hours about how the meta is going to evolve after the ban. This is more like a videos I'm gonna do after, once we actually get the decision from FFG. I will basically make a videos and basically give my impressions on what I think the meta is gonna head towards after this ban. And you can expect this video very soon after. Thank you so much for following that video. If you have other amazing suggestions on how you would improve the state of the meta, feel free to put them on the comments below and let me know. Thank you so much for following the video, and if you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. It does help me a lot. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.